All right. Welcome, everyone. Today we are diving into something, well, it's a pretty fundamental shift in how we build for the web. I'm talking specifically about handling data in Next.js. You've probably heard about them, server actions. They promise to make our lives a whole lot easier. So yeah, let's just jump right in.
So, does this sound familiar? If you've ever built, a full stack app, this question probably hits really close to home. It's that constant back and forth, right? Client to server, server to client, all that boilerplate code you have to write for every single mutation. It just adds up, and man, it creates so much friction in the development process. Well, the good news is there's a simpler way, a much more direct way. And that is exactly what we're here to talk about. The Next.js team has come up with a new approach that just slices right through all that complexity. It lets us think about changing our data in a way that's way more integrated and, honestly, just more intuitive. Okay, so, Section 1, the old API hassle. To really get why this new approach is so great, we kind of have to take a quick look back at how we used to do things. You got to understand the pain to appreciate the solution, right? Let's see why this old way was such a hassle. And here it is, the old familiar 5-step dance. First, you create an API route. Then you write the server handler. Then you jump over to the client to write the fetch logic. Then you've got to manually handle loading and error states. And finally, you have to remember to invalidate the cache to keep the UI in sync. Every single step is a context switch, jumping between files, between client and server logic. And the worst part? That last one. Manually trying to keep the UI in sync with the database, that is just asking for trouble. It's a ton of boilerplate, and yeah, so much room for error. Okay, now for the fun part. Section 2, the server action shift. Let's put that old way aside and look at this new paradigm. This is where it all gets really interesting. We're shifting from that complicated layered approach to something way more direct.
So what is a server action, really? Think of it like this. It's just a function. But it's a special function that you mark with this little use server directive right at the top. That's the magic trick. It's a signal to Next.js that says, hey, even though I'm calling this from a client component, I want you to run this code securely on the server. And just like that, the entire network layer, creating an API endpoint, sending the request, all of it is just abstracted away. It's handled for you. It's amazing.
And look at this. This shows the difference so perfectly. That whole 5-step mess we just walked through, it collapses down to just 2 simple steps. 1, you define your server action function. 2, you attach it right to a forms action. That's literally it. The amount of boilerplate code that just disappears it's just massive.
All right, so it's obviously simpler to write. We get that. But what about that other huge problem? How does this new model solve that super sticky issue of keeping our UI in sync with the database? This, right here, is where the real magic of server actions kicks in. First, we have to define the enemy. And the enemy is stale data. See, Next.js is super fast because it's really smart about caching stuff on the client. It makes page loads feel instant. But that awesome performance feature turns into a bug the second you update your data. The cache has no idea the database changed, so your user's just staring at old, outdated information. Not good.
And server actions solve this with this really elegant, coordinated lifecycle. It's a 3-step process. First, you mutate. Your server action updates the database. Simple enough. Second, you revalidate. You call this function revalidatePath, and it just blows away the stale client cache. Poof, gone. And third, you redirect. You send the user to the updated page. But since the cache is now empty, the browser is forced to go get fresh data from the server. It's this beautiful, tightly coupled chain of events, mutate, revalidate, redirect, and it absolutely guarantees your UI stays in sync.
All right, Section 4. Let's really put these two approaches head-to-head, server actions versus APIs. I think a direct comparison like this is going to make the advantages crystal clear. What's so cool here isn't just the code, it's the whole architectural philosophy behind it. With traditional APIs, we build in what you could call horizontal layers. Your UI code is over here, and your API logic is way over there in a different folder. But server actions, they encourage a vertical slice architecture. This means the logic to, say, create an invoice, lives right there with the create invoice form component. All the code for one feature is in one place. This co-location makes everything so much more self-contained and way easier to understand and navigate.
And yeah, this table just sums it all up perfectly. Development overhead, server actions win, hands down. Cache integration, deeply integrated. Way better. We've seen that. But check out these other two rows, security and progressive enhancement. Security isn't an afterthought. It's built in with things like encrypted closures. It's just safer by default. And this is huge, because this is all built on standard HTML forms. It works even if the user's JavaScript fails to load. Your app just became more resilient and more accessible, automatically. That's a massive win.
Okay, theory is great and all, but let's get practical. Section 5, CRUD in action. How does this elegant pattern actually apply to the bread and butter stuff we do every day? Creating, updating, and deleting data.
So let's take creating an invoice. The best practice here is pretty clear. First, you always validate your form data. A library like Zod is perfect for this. And here's a little pro tip. You got to use something like z.coerce.number because everything from an HTML form, even a number input, comes in as a string. Oh, and for money, always convert it to cents. You do not want to mess with floating point errors. After all that sanitizing, then you can execute your SQL insert. And what do you do at the end? You got it. You call revalidatePath and then redirect.
Now, updating data, it's pretty much the same pattern. The main difference is you'll probably be on a dynamic route, something like invoices/ID/edit. You'll use that ID to go fetch the current data to fill out the form, right? And then your server action will use that very same ID for its SQL update query. But after the update happens, the lifecycle is exactly the same. Revalidate and redirect.
Okay, now for deleting. This is where we see a really slick feature. Instead of messing around with hidden form fields to pass an ID, you can use JavaScript's native .bind method right on your server action. So delete invoice.bind null ID creates a brand new function that's already preloaded with that specific invoice ID. It's cleaner, it's more declarative, and it's definitely more secure.
And check this out. Here's a subtle but super important optimization. Let's say you're on a page looking at a list of invoices, and you delete one. Well, you don't actually need to redirect anywhere. Just calling revalidatePath is enough. Next.js is smart. It knows you're on that page, and it'll just refetch the data for that path. The component re-renders, the item is gone. It's a totally seamless UI update for the user.
Okay, let's wrap this up. Section 6, the future is direct. When you put all this together, what does this shift really mean for us, the developers building these apps? Where is all of this going?
So to recap, the benefits they're so clear and powerful. First, we get a much simpler architecture with way less boilerplate code to write. Second, we get this robust, totally integrated solution for managing the cache, which solves that stale data problem for good. And third, we get better security and accessibility right out of the box, without even trying.
You know, this quote here really nails it. Server actions are a complete solution for full-stack data management, not merely a way to execute server-side functions. And that's the key takeaway. This isn't just a fancy way to call a function on the server. No, it's a complete, holistic system that thinks about the entire journey, from the moment the user clicks a button, all the way to them seeing the updated UI on their screen.
And that leads us to one final, kind of provocative thought. What if your UI could feel completely instant? I mean, updating before the server even gets back to you. This whole direct integrated architecture we've been talking about, it lays the perfect groundwork for really advanced patterns like optimistic UI. Just imagine clicking save and seeing the change happen instantly, while the server action does its thing in the background. This architecture, it doesn't just make our code simpler. It opens the door to building way faster, way more responsive user experiences. And honestly, that is a very exciting future to be building towards.